Hi, everyone. My name is Michael Gamilla. I'm the programming director of ImageOut. And thanks for joining us as we celebrate our 30th anniversary. I know that seems too long ago, but it's a great part of making a legacy for the LGBTQ plus community here in Rochester. And we are honored to join us today. Um, the director of one of our films in this year's lineup. Please welcome Broderick Fox, and he did Manscaping. Hi, Broderick.
Hi,
How's everything?
it's great. I'm really happy to get a chance to connect, even if it's virtually. And congratulations on the festival anniversary. That's fantastic.
Yeah. Um, well, we're here primarily to talk about your documentary, Manscaping. So what I'm interested about is your journey in making this film, because it's it's not a topic that you usually see in when you talk about LGBTQ plus documentary. So can you talk about your journey? What inspired you to make this film?
Yeah. So, I mean, just for people who haven't seen the movie yet, Manscaping essentially follows three queer men who, each in their own particular way, are kind of reimagining the barbershop space as a more inclusive space. And in doing so, I think hopefully kind of raise questions around challenging kind of toxic masculinity or kind of restrictive ideas or notions of masculinity or what it is to be a man, and by extension, sort of just questioning kind of fixed gender roles more broadly. And yeah, the journey of the film, as with kind of all documentaries I think that I make, which are kind of queer-centered stories, um, they come from a place of personal curiosity, but also kind of a push-pull tension, something that sort of both attracts me and maybe fills me with some trepidation. So, similar to some of the participants in the film, I've had kind of a real push-pull to the barbershop space. Um, and it um, being one that is kind of a special space in terms of imaging oneself, but also can be a really kind of restrictive and potentially exclusive space in terms of the types of masculinity or misogyny that maybe gets performed there, or the homophobia that could potentially be performed there. And and so I started out sort of asking how body hair and barbering um, have been used as spaces of kind of performative play and exploration in the queer community for decades. And was thinking that I would make a film that refracted those kinds of questions by trying to recruit a range of participants who are perhaps artists, barbers, and even potentially performers like drag kings and things like that. And I filmed with a range of people, but the three stories that really seem to kind of lock together and really kind of resonate and refract some of these core questions um, turned out to be the three participants you see in the film. The British Film Institute's programmer had a really great logline that I stole, which kind of gives you a little bit of a teaser in terms of who they are. So his logline is a, um, a naked fetishist, an Afrofuturist, and a community activist walk into a barbershop, which I just love. So yeah. So
Yeah.
the film really is looking at an artist and two very different barbers who have each kind of asked questions about how we could use the barbershop space to think about gender and also kind of access and inclusion in a range of social spaces. So, yeah, that's a little bit of the journey. Um,
Yeah. Um, it's something that I'm not totally aware of uh, until lately. Because I think a lot of gay men go to salons and with gay hairdressers.
mhm.
Um, so they don't necessarily encounter the same fears and trepidations that queer people, especially queer people of color, who prefer to get their hair done at a barber shop.
Mm.
And then a few years ago, I myself started going to a barber shop because I don't have a lot of hair anymore. So I didn't need a lot of styling. I just need,
Mhm.
a quick refresher and, like a clipper and all that. So I said, you know what, I'm gonna go to a barber shop. And then the barber shop that I started going to is generally a black barber shop. So um, I've only seen one white person then there in the years that I've been going, and me. Um, but my hair is coarse because I'm an Asian guy from the Philippines. So, but I feel like they do a good job
Mm.
in figuring out how to handle my hair. Um, but I think maybe it's just the environment because I would show up there, dressed how I would dress up, which is not entirely very masculine. But I've never encountered homophobia either. So um, for me, it wasn't something that occurred to me until I watched your documentary. Um, so, having said that, how did you find all your subjects? I know you mentioned that you ended up interviewing or covering a few different individuals, but did you put a call out there for the documentary, and how did that go?
It was a little bit more organic than that. So one of the participants, Devon Shimayama, is a really extraordinary visual artist, and is sort of a black queer individual. Um, and I knew of his art. I had followed his art. You can see the poster back here has one of
Yeah.
his amazing paintings on it that are figured in the piece. He started to produce this barbershop series of paintings as I was working on the film, and it felt obvious to reach back out to him for that. And kind of apropos of some of the things that you were describing, I mean, he really offers an important and valuable perspective in terms of kind of a double bind that he experiences as a BIPOC queer individual who he talks about this really kind of formatively scarring moment going to a predominantly white salon or shop in rural Pennsylvania and being essentially turned away, being told that they don't cut textured hair, um, and then going to black barbershop spaces where he's able to get a really extraordinary haircut, but feels in some ways that he needs to kind of go back in the closet or regulate his behavior because of kind of a fear or a potential perception of kind of homophobia, and expressed that feeling to friends of his, other sort of queer BIPOC individuals who shared that feeling, and so realized it wasn't a singular experience, and produced the barbershop series of paintings to kind of question and address that. Um, and another of the participants, Richard Savvy, who is the naked
The
barber of
naked
Sydney,
barber.
yeah, is an extraordinary sort of extraordinarily talented stylist. He, used to work the runways of London and was Kate Moss's personal stylist and won awards for hair. But in Sydney, as part of the fetish community, one day had this idea of kind of bringing together kind of his two worlds and creating this space he calls the Naked Barber Space, which kind of offers a range of services and opportunities that the piece explores, but really connects barbering and grooming with a place of sort of play and personal exploration. And I knew of him just because I've made films in Australia before, and he was on my radar, and he was generous enough to say yes and let us come and film with him. And then the third participant, Jesse Anderson, is a transgender barber up in Vancouver, Canada. And when I started to kind of just Google and look for sort of queer barbershop spaces, or LGBTQ barbershop spaces, Big Bros Barbershop, the barbershop that he created in Vancouver, kept coming up in search results. And it's been cool now as we kind of take the film around the world, and I try to kind of connect whenever I'm able to come to a screening in person, try to find a local queer barbershop that is actually kind of modeling the practices of the film, and have them come and sort of link the ideas to the community that we're presenting the film in. Often those shops all know of Big Bros, and there's already kind of like
Yeah.
a communication going on. But the mandate of Big Bros is to be a space for everyone, but
Yes.
that trans and non-binary individuals know that it is most certainly a space that they will be welcomed in. And it's been really fascinating to kind of hear from Jesse's clients, who really run kind of a range of identities and gender identifications, about the ways in which they've been kind of shut out of the barbershop space. I mean, even cis females who just want a short haircut and are told that they don't, that barbershops won't cut their hair, or Jesse's styling partner at Big Bros talks about this thing that they call the no penis tax,
Yeah.
where basically the same haircut essentially gets marked up from $25 or $30 to $90, depending on how somebody is reading your gender. And so there's some really amazing business practices that are modeled in Big Bros around um, sort of gender neutral pricing, sliding scale work, and all these ways in which the shop actually extends beyond just being a barbershop to being a community space, which is really exciting to model. But to answer your question, I found Jesse by the wonders of the internet.
Yeah. Um, because while you were talking, I just remembered in my barber shop, there was one time that I had an appointment, so I was waiting to for my turn, and then a friend of mine from the community, a black guy, a big black guy. By big, I just meant like he works out. So, um, and when we see each other outside, we give each other a hug and all that. And so when he entered the barber shop space, I could I saw him from outside. So as soon as he entered, it said my face lit up. It's like, hey, I didn't realize you go here. That's what my face kind of looks like. And then his face was different. It's almost like
Mm,
like, uh-oh, there's someone gay here.
yeah.
So he was right away, oh hey, Michael, extended his arm like to keep that distance and say
Mm,
hello. So right away, I kind of read the situation. Oh, okay. In this space, he prefers not to be himself or
mm,
be recognized as queer. He wants to keep up the masculine appearance. So it's like, oh, that's pretty interesting.
yeah.
Um, anyway, so I know you also mentioned that when you were deciding on when you were cutting the film and deciding who to feature, you just thought all these stories probably work better or work best together.
Mhm,
So my question is, I love the diversity of stories that you shared in your documentary. Like you mentioned, there's an artist that's doing artwork about the barbershop experience, and someone who's been traumatized early on by his experience in the barbershop setting that he cuts him he cuts his hair himself for the most part,
mhm.
and then the trans uh, barber in Vancouver, and then the naked barber um,
In Sydney,
in
yeah.
Sydney. Every time I say the naked barber of Sydney, I think of Sweeney Todd. Like
The
for some
Demon
reason,
Barber of Fleet Street, yeah.
yeah.
Totally.
uh, but anyway, was there, like I said, there's quite a diversity in that subjects, documentary subjects, and not only in the personalities involved, but also in their geographic locations, one
Mm.
in Philly, one in Vancouver, Canada, in the West Coast, and then one all the way out in Sydney. Was that intentional? Did that make their story even more interesting to you when when you're putting the documentary together? Just because you wanted to tell a story that's diverse and would possibly uh, attract a wider audience?
That's a great question. I mean, I knew as I reached out to people that it really was important to me to try to refract, um, a really diverse array of members of the queer community. Um, the international focus, in some ways, kind of happened a little bit more organically, as I kind of described. I mean, knowing Devin's work and him being in the U.S., being aware of the Naked Barber and having a relationship to Australia, and basically having Big Bros continue to be a space that sort of came up, and also having made a film with some connections up in Vancouver in the past too. Those were sort of lucky, though I am really grateful that it does kind of refract a range of I mean, certainly a range of sort of like English-speaking Western contexts. I wouldn't necessarily characterize the film as like comprehensively global in any
Yeah.
stretch of the imagination, but certainly in terms of kind of critiquing or questioning kind of Western notions of masculinity, um, then which are in some ways kind of tied to kind of white supremacist and colonialist histories that link all three of those cultural contexts for sure. I think it does the film really well to have that range of perspectives. Um, in terms of, as I mentioned, in terms of really kind of figuring out what the core of the film was, I mean, if I'd written a fiction script, I don't think I could have kind of anticipated and really planned the really rich ways in which Devin, Jesse, and Richard each kind of refract a really interesting and diverse array of kind of cis trends and sort of BIPOC and racial experiences, and so that and the way in which the barbershop space itself is kind of the nexus or the point of both maybe past trauma and possibility in each of their reimaginings. And so that's one of the things I just love about documentary is you do a lot of research and you do a lot of work, but then at a certain point you just kind of just you go where the yes is, and when you're really lucky and things align, it's kind of richer and kind of more extraordinary and beautiful than anything you could have imagined or written on the page yourself. And when that really happens, it's just it's something beyond me. So I'm incredibly grateful. But I feel like it happened in this experience.
Yeah. I was wondering if you've heard of any feedback from people who've seen the documentary, as far as maybe having um, a story that they could connect more, or maybe
Mm.
a subject that one of the barbers that got their attention more. Because when I listen to some people around here who have seen the documentary, I wasn't surprised that they were talking about the naked barber,
Mm-hmm.
just because there's a sexual component, visually anyway, um,
Mm-hmm.
to that segment. And but I was also surprised how when they talked about genital grooming, which I thought was very interesting as well. um, there was a lot of it's I think the the clientele was mostly trans men also. So can you talk about that, or just if you've gotten any feedback from viewers about uh, what story they connect with the most?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it varies, and it's always fun to sort of see. I think everybody seems. I've had many experiences where people have kind of talked about, loving all three participants, but so and so is really like the person I identified with, and it's always somebody different, which is really neat to see, because I think everybody kind of finds an access point or a point of connection in really different ways. Some of the most powerful experiences for me so far, as I mentioned, in terms of trying to connect the film to local shops that are doing this kind of work. And I'll do a shout out right now. There's an organization that some of the viewers may be familiar with, called strandsfortrans.org, which I came across and think is so cool. It's basically some stylists in New York basically decided that they were sick of trying to kind of find queer friendly barbershop and salon spaces, and so it's kind of like this big concept, low tech idea where they've created strandsfortrans.org as a URL, and any shop around the world who wants to sort of identify themselves as LGBTQ friendly can contact them, and they'll drop a pin on a Google map, and it's searchable. And so essentially, none of us ever again will have to go to a new city or a new town and not know where to go. That can be your first point of exploration. I think there's over 4,000 pins that have dropped around the world right now, which is extraordinary. Um,
It's
and
like
so
a hub
yeah, it
for,
is.
yeah.
And so that's exciting. And I think some of the richest experiences for me have been to kind of connect with those local shops and have them come and really kind of connect them with their queer community. Quite often, the community already knows of these spaces,
Yeah.
but to have the work that's modeled in this film mirrored back to the people who are doing it locally has been quite emotional, because I think in some ways they've all been kind of doing it independently and intuitively based on their own experiences and the identification of a need in their own community. But there's something kind of powerful and sort of solidarity building to kind of see that what they're doing is actually part of a bigger cause, and that's been rich and really nice to see. And then the other thing has really been cool is to see a range of allies, sort of non-queer individuals, or cis individuals, cis female individuals, for example, parents of LGBTQ kids, identify with this piece in really particular ways, and see the connection. So cis women sort of talking about the no penis tax and being like, I get that, or even sort of cishet men being like, I feel sometimes intimidated and uncomfortable in the barbershop space and feel like I kind of need to code switch or puff up my masculinity in some way to go into those spaces. And so I think there's been some really cool ways in which the piece hopefully really speaks to LGBTQ individuals, but also kind of build some allyship and some connections to some larger questions about gender, even beyond our community. So that's cool. That's been really great.
Um, has any of the subject matters like Devon, Jesse, and Dick, um, has anyone seen a screening or attended a screening of the film?
Yeah, it's been great actually. Everybody has so far,
Okay.
in different ways. So one of the earliest screenings was actually at the Sydney Mardi Gras Film Festival in Sydney, and it
Yes.
was kind of like at the height of Omicron, and I didn't get to go, and I was so bummed. But Richard was there, and he represented, and I think that was really special. And it's actually going to screen up at the Byron Bay Film Festival in Byron Bay, Australia, in sort of northern New South Wales, in a week, and he's going to go represent as well for that festival, which is great. Um, I had the really nice opportunity to be able to screen the film at Outfest here in Los Angeles, and both Devin and Jesse were able to come down for that, and so that was really special. Also, kind of strange because the film is so intimate about each of the individuals, but they hadn't met one another, and so for Jesse and
Yeah.
Devin to actually kind of meet in IRL and engage with each other was really great too. So that was special to have them together. The film screened in Pittsburgh, at the Real Q Festival there last week, and though I
Yeah.
wasn't able to make it, Devin represented there too, and I got to pop in on a virtual Q&A for that too. So yeah, it has been really
And
neat
I
to be able to connect them.
yeah, I think Vancouver Queer Festival happened like couple of weeks ago. I don't know if your film screened there, but
No, it didn't screen as part
okay,
of that. Yeah.
okay. Um, so having heard back from your subjects, um, especially for Jesse and for Dick, has their business benefited from the exposure that the film gave them? Just, just having the information out there that they provide you services. And have you heard anything from either one of them about that?
Well, listen, it's early days. I mean, I certainly won't give
Yeah,
any credit for boosting their business. I hope it does. I hope as the
yeah.
piece journeys out in the world, it will kind of have a positive bump for them. Jesse's Jesse's shop Big Bros. There's such a demand up in Vancouver that he's actually in the process right now of exploring ways to actually expand his shop. So he may not even need a boost from the film. I mean, he's off and running. Um, I think all of us were impacted and had really kind of challenging experiences through COVID, but barbers and stylists are a really particular kind of
Yeah.
service industry that were hit incredibly hard. Um, and I think any barbershop, it requires a certain degree of contact and intimacy. But Richard's work in particular takes that to another level. And so I am really hopeful that if there's any way in which the piece can sort of amplify or shed light on the work he does, that it'll have a positive effect. But I don't have a particular claim to be able to say right now that it has, but I hope it does. I definitely
Yes,
hope.
exactly. Hopefully, somewhere down the line, when you've done all these film festivals, that it would give exposure to them.
Plus, World Pride is in Sydney in March, and so
Yes,
maybe
yes.
having this film kind of come into people's consciousness means that everyone's already planning to go to the
To
Naked
visit,
Barber in Sydney when they get there.
yeah, exactly. So this is a question, a selfish question, maybe as a programmer. um, can you tell me your decision to just do a 60-minute plus documentary as opposed to have a full length feature
Yeah.
documentary? Because, as a programmer, it's much more difficult to program. I feel like, people are expecting, oh,
Mm.
that is too short, or there must be another a film that would play with this film. Um, and certainly, it sounds like you could have had other people as an additional subject. So I was just wondering if there's any particular reason for
Mm.
keeping the runtime that you have for the documentary as it is.
That's a great question, and it's great to get sort of the feedback or the perspective of a programmer too. Um, I have a real privilege of teaching. I'm at my office at Occidental College here in LA, and teaching film and media. So not just sort of having to wear two divorced hats, but actually integrating hats in some ways. Um, and and so in that sense, when I make work, I have the real sort of privilege of really putting the content first and listening to the content. I don't at this point have this sort of external, say, studio or something like that that's telling me that we need to deliver it at this length or something like that as a prerequisite. And so, yeah, when I really sat down and worked through this material, um, I got honest with myself about what are the stories that are really kind of amplifying one another in terms of refracting this issue. And as I described, I mean, even I learned, and it surprised me in a lot of ways, how these stories came together. And really trying to honor the material and listen to what the material was saying. And, I'll admit there is kind of like there was a bit of a trepidation on my part, like, oh, 60 minutes, is that like what is that? It's like kind of more of a traditional kind of broadcast TV length. And yet, um, I think to kind of pad the film in some way, or just for the sake of making it longer or something like that, felt kind of disingenuous to the material. And So yeah, my hope is that 60 minutes is actually a workable time for a range of kind of like more traditional broadcast contexts, or even sort of streaming spaces in which maybe duration isn't so important. And so far with festivals, there's been a mix of approaches in terms of scheduling or programming the film. As you mentioned, like maybe pairing it with a short, or two shorts. Sometimes there's a perfect match in terms of a short that speaks to, say, notions of masculinity in a different way.
Yeah.
Um, or thinking about pairing the 60-minute screening with some sort of community conversation around access and inclusion in small business or things like that. So we've
Yeah.
come up with some creative ways to kind of, at least for the in-person experience, to make people feel like they're getting the bang for their buck, and feeling like it's worth coming out into the
Yeah.
world and going to a physical space. So yeah, if there's
Yeah.
any programmers out there listening, think about some of those ideas. I think we can make it work.
No, certainly for programmers, we can definitely make it work. Like you said, I think it's more important to have that discussion, community discussion afterwards.
Yeah.
For me, it's easier. Then it becomes a more meaningful experience for the audience, having
Yeah.
that chance to talk about the film right after watching it. So, and it's not really problematic, the 60 minutes. I was just wondering, were you planning on being on broadcast TV? Because certainly that length is easily editable to a
Hmm.
acceptable length
Yeah.
for TV. But anyway, like I said, it was a selfish question. Just
No, it's a
I
great
was just
question.
wondering.
Yeah.
So this could be my final question, and I was just wondering, and you might have touched on this earlier. As a filmmaker and as a person, what was your takeaway from the experience of putting together this film?
Mm.
Uh, if you learned anything from it on a personal level, as someone who's in the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't talked about a big part of kind of my push pull of barbering and hair, which is, I there's another film of mine called The Skin I'm In, which people are welcome to check out online, which really kind of explores my own sort of um, challenges with feeling comfortable in my own skin as a young queer person, and dealing with what I call kind of cultural dis-ease. And it's a journey of kind of all the kind of both damaging, but then also kind of in a restorative fashion, I think beautiful approaches to kind of being comfortable in my body through a journey of getting a full back tattoo. But that film sort of talks about, in a way, in my youth, the way in which I kind of compartmentalized a number of different identities, some of that code switching we talked about before. And one of my alter egos, strangely enough, in my 20s, was a persona that I called Rick. And Rick, in the early days of kind of online dating and online sites, this is a pre-app time
Yeah.
in the 2000s, used to post ads for erotic haircutting services and things like that. I was,
Oh
based
wow.
on that sort of similar push-pull that Devin was describing, I figured out how to cut my own hair pretty early in my 20s. And I actually haven't been to a barbershop and gotten my hair cut at a barbershop in 26 years. I cut my own hair, I cut my friend's
Wow.
hair, and had that kind of strange, kind of almost, I mean, I'm not Richard Savvy by any stretch of the imagination, but kind of that naked barber exploration time of my own as a space to kind of figure out who I was as a queer person. And I think in some unconscious ways, explore, barbering as a space of queer play and safe space formation. And so my own kind of, like, you could even sort of call it a hair fetish, perhaps, in me. All of that kind of sort of cooked and sort of led me to think about this in a kind of more conceptual, cultural way, for sure. I would feel disingenuous not to at least mention that really kind of personal part of the journey of making this film. But in terms of what I learned, I think some of my kind of naive and clumsy and certainly not trained and intuitive instincts, and some of the encounters I had with people during that time, where, beyond sex, I think some of those encounters, giving somebody a haircut or helping them with back hair, or trimming their pubic hair or something like that, were, just sort of incredibly vulnerable and intimate situations. And I actually saw, even in my own sort of limited skills, the transformative power of a haircut, or even just being seen by another person. And so to see these individuals sort of take that to a professional and sort of organized and outward facing and generative level, it was really kind of emotional for me, and powerful to see how each of these individuals in their own way has taken what might be constituted as personal trauma and transformed it into some form of cultural problem solving and action. And I think the film, rather than sort of resting at the level of kind of pain or trauma, doesn't sort of, certainly doesn't try to gloss over or ignore that, but in a way kind of models that queer creativity and that queer joy, and that queer possibility that I think is sort of our superpower. And I kind of wanted to make a film that takes extraordinary individuals' examples and say, come on, culture, catch up. We're already here. Catch up with us. So that's my hope. But yeah, in that way, I think it was a really kind of healing and powerful film for me to make. And I learned a lot about, BIPOC and trans experiences, which I absolutely don't intend to speak for, but alongside in this piece too. And I learned a lot from all the participants who shared their experiences.
Well, I'm glad I asked the question. So I knew there has to be a deeper connection to
Yeah.
hair cutting.
That's like
I'm kidding.
No, it's great. I'm glad you asked it, and it got out there. So it's a lot to sort of start in answering the question in the first question, but it's maybe a nice way to close.
Yeah. Well, as part of your parting words, and thank you for spending time with us and doing this chat. What can you can you talk about any future projects that you're probably working on or that are in the pipeline for you?
Yeah. So this film is on the festival circuit, which is fantastic, and I'm hoping that we will be able to kind of release it to the world probably March or April of the new year. So be on the lookout, and all of our socials are at Manscaping Movie, and then the website is manscapingmovie.com. So you can sort of follow there and get alerts on where it's going to screen next, and when we'll do our sort of big digital release and things. Similar to the last response, and thinking about kind of the place of kind of personal curiosity or fear that or desire that a lot of my projects stem from. I think the next one is somebody who's getting older. I think I'm starting to look at and think about age. The queer community, but I think certainly American culture more broadly is very kind of youth focused. A lot of the rhetoric, even around sort of illness, is around kind of, couched in this military language of like fighting and all these other sorts of things. So we've got a lot of kind of death fears and immortality desires in culture more broadly. And so as in sort of thinking about a film around age, I don't want to sort of indict the queer community particularly in being superficial or anything like that. But I think in some ways, as an aging queer person, I'm curious to think about notions of elderhood or intergenerational disconnects perhaps that happen in the queer community, but also in terms of that queer possibility and that queer imagining, how we might queer age and reimagine it too. And I have a hunch, similar to the barbershop spaces I was able to find, that there are some people who are kind of really doing kind of extraordinary and interesting things to kind of model possibilities of thinking about intergenerational exchange and age too. So It's going to be about queering age. I think that's the next project.
I think that's certainly interesting, and I know from personal experience and from friends that I've spoken to, there's always a concern about how do we continue to navigate the queer space as we age,
Hmm.
and what would we need um, moving forward, like how can we take care of each other and all
Yes.
that stuff. So certainly I think there's a huge market for what you're thinking.
Oh, good.
Anyway, well, good luck with that.
Thank
And
you.
again, thanks for spending time with us and doing this chat. And hopefully much luck to Manscaping the movie, and hopefully it will reach us as many people as you hoped it would. So thanks again.
Well, thank you so much.